I never thought I'd be standing in her living room, holding my breath over something as ordinary as a dress. But then again, nothing about her ever felt ordinary to me. She smiled faintly when she opened the door, like she was half apologizing for even asking me to come by. Her hair was pinned loosely, a few strands brushing her cheek, and she wore a simple cardigan, sleeves pushed up to her elbows. The kind of effortless detail that made me look too long before I caught myself. "Come in," she said, voice low, carrying the kind of warmth that doesn't need to be exaggerated. I stepped inside, the familiar scent of her house wrapping around me, coffee, laundry, a faint trace of perfume that lingered in the air like it didn't want to leave either. She told me she had a dinner to attend, something important, though she didn't say what exactly. And then, with a hesitation that felt too vulnerable for someone so composed, she admitted she didn't know what to wear. That's when she asked me, if I'd help her choose. At first I laughed under my breath, certain she was joking. But her eyes held mine a little too long, a softness there I didn't know how to read. "I trust your opinion," she added, almost like she regretted it as soon as she said it. The words stayed in the air between us, heavier than they should have been. I nodded, probably too quickly, pretending my heart wasn't already racing. She disappeared down the hall and came back with 3 hangers draped over her arm. A red dress, a black one, and something pale blue that caught the light from the window. She laid them carefully across the back of the couch, brushing invisible dust from the fabric, as though the act of smoothing them down was easier than meeting my eyes. "Which one?" she asked, standing a little off to the side, arms folded loosely across her chest. I walked closer, my hands shoved in my pockets, staring too hard at the choices in front of me. The black one was sleek, safe. The blue was soft, almost delicate. But the red, there was something about it that felt impossible to ignore. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I felt the weight of her presence beside me, the quiet of the room pressing in. She wasn't saying anything either, and for a second, I wondered if she could hear my heart in the silence. Finally, I cleared my throat. "The red?" Her head tilted, just slightly. "You're sure?" "Yeah," I said, more firmly than I expected. It suits you." She held my gaze then, longer than before, like she was testing if I meant it. I didn't look away. I couldn't. She smiled barely, but enough. And then, with a breath I almost heard catch in her chest, she picked up the red dress. "Wait here," she said quietly, before walking toward her bedroom. I sat down on the couch, palms pressed to my knees, my body tense like I'd just done something dangerous. I tried to slow my breathing, staring at the floor, but my mind wouldn't stop replaying the way her voice had dipped when she asked if I was sure. And then, just as the silence settled in too deep, I heard the soft click of her bedroom door opening again. I looked up. And what I saw made it impossible to breathe. When she stepped out of the bedroom wearing the red dress, it was like the room itself paused. The fabric clung just enough to remind me she wasn't some untouchable figure in my life. She was real, present, standing only a few feet away. She smoothed her hands down her sides, half nervous, half composed. "Well?" she asked, tilting her head with that same guarded smile. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I must have looked ridiculous, sitting there frozen on the couch. Finally I managed, "You look perfect." She let out a small laugh, but it wasn't careless. It sounded almost shy, like she wasn't used to hearing it anymore. And in that moment I realized something I'd never let myself think: she wasn't just my friend's mom. She was a woman who hadn't been told she was beautiful in a long time. She sat down across from me, crossing her legs, and for a second her eyes softened. "You know, I don't usually ask for help like this," she admitted. "I used to have someone for that. Her ex-husband." I'd heard pieces from her son, the arguments, the distance, the eventual silence. Divorce had left her quieter, maybe lonelier, though she never showed it outright. I nodded, unsure if I should say anything. Well, you can ask me. Anytime. The words slipped out before I could reel them back. She looked at me for a long second, as though trying to decide what I meant by that. I dropped my eyes to the floor, suddenly fascinated by the way the sunlight stretched across the rug. My chest tightened. Why did I say that? Her voice broke the silence, softer now. You remind me of him sometimes. I looked up, startled. Not in a bad way, she added quickly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Just the way you listen. The way you look at me like you're actually paying attention. I didn't know what to say, so I stayed quiet. She sighed, almost laughing at herself. Ignore me. I shouldn't be telling you this. But I couldn't ignore her. My eyes kept tracing the way her hands fidgeted in her lap, how she tried to fold her vulnerability back into herself like a note she'd revealed too soon. The truth was, I'd been paying attention for longer than I should admit. I noticed the way she carried herself, proud yet cautious. I noticed how her laughter had an edge, as if it didn't come as freely anymore. And I noticed that when she looked at me, there was something she quickly tried to hide. It was wrong, I knew that. She was my friend's mom, and the line between us wasn't supposed to blur. But it already had, at least inside me. She leaned back, her gaze drifting toward the window. The air between us was heavy, like we'd both said too much without really saying it. Then, almost absent-mindedly, she reached for the edge of her sleeve, tugging it down as if to cover herself. But when her hand brushed the cushion beside her, I reached without thinking, my fingers brushing hers. We both froze. She didn't pull away. And in that fragile, suspended moment, I knew something had shifted, something neither of us could take back. Her hand lingered beneath mine, either of us daring to move first. The silence was so sharp I could hear the clock in the hallway ticking, counting seconds we had no right to be stealing. Then, 3 sharp knocks at the front door. We jolted apart, her hand vanishing into her lap, my pulse hammering. She stood quickly, smoothing her dress as if that tiny brush of skin hadn't just happened. Stay here, she whispered, her voice too tight, too careful. I sat frozen as she walked to the door. Through the thin walls I heard a man's voice, deep, casual. A neighbor. He was asking about her mailbox, something trivial. She laughed politely, her tone practiced, distant. But I caught the shift in her posture when she glanced back at me mid-conversation. Like she needed to check I was still there. Like she couldn't help it. The neighbor left. The door clicked shut. She leaned against it for a second, exhaling, eyes closed. Then she straightened and came back to the living room. Either of us spoke. She sank into the chair across from me, red fabric slipping against her knee, and shook her head with a low laugh. This is ridiculous. I shouldn't have asked you here. I swallowed hard. You didn't do anything wrong. Her eyes snapped up to mine, sharp but trembling. Didn't I? The words sat between us, heavy with meaning. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, desperate to say something but terrified of what it might sound like. My mouth opened, then shut again. Her lips parted as if she might speak, but instead she stood abruptly. I should change. Before I lose my mind. She started toward the hallway. And I, like an idiot, stood too. Wait. My voice cracked louder than I meant. She stopped, turned slightly. The air vibrated with everything we weren't saying. I don't want to leave like this, I blurted. Like none of this happened. Her jaw tightened. She looked at me, then past me, then back again. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I know, I admitted. But you're not the only one feeling it. The words escaped, raw and reckless. Her breath caught, shoulders stiffening. For a long moment she just stared at me, no mask, no practiced smile, nothing to shield the truth flickering in her eyes. She took one step closer. So small, but it made my heart pound like a warning. We were inches apart now. Too close. Her perfume, her warmth, her silence pressing against me. Her hand lifted slightly, like she might touch me. But then, her phone buzzed sharply on the table. We both startled. She snatched it up. The screen lit with a name I recognized instantly. Her son. My best friend. She stared at it frozen. Then back at me. And for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She let the phone ring until it went silent, face pale in the dim light. Neither of us spoke. The sound of it lingered in the room like a threat, reminding us exactly why this couldn't go any further. I should go, I whispered, even though my feet didn't move. Her hands gripped the phone too tightly. Yes, she said quickly. Then softer. No. I don't know. The words cracked something open in me. You can't pretend this isn't happening. You feel it too. Her eyes darted to mine, wide, furious at herself for being caught. You're just a kid, she snapped, too fast, too harsh. It stung, but I didn't back down. I'm not a kid. Not with you. Her breath faltered. She pressed a hand to her forehead, pacing toward the window. You don't understand what this would mean. If anyone found out, it's not about anyone else. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. It's about us. The word us hung between us like a dare. She turned sharply, eyes glassy now. There can't be an US. You're my son's. She cut herself off, choking on the rest. I stepped closer before I could think better of it. Then why can't you look at me without? My throat tightened. Without that look? Her silence was my answer. Her lips parted, but nothing came. She backed into the edge of the couch, nowhere left to go. My hands trembled at my sides, wanting to reach for her but terrified of what that meant. Finally, she whispered, almost to herself, I can't lose control again. The confession slipped out like a wound reopening. My chest ached. Again. I wanted to ask what she meant, what heartbreak she was carrying, but the moment was too fragile to risk more words. Instead, I stepped closer. Close enough that I could see the faint tremor in her hands, the rise and fall of her breath. You're not losing control, I said, my voice raw. You're choosing. She shut her eyes, a tear slipping free before she could stop it. You don't know what you're asking of me. Then tell me to leave, I whispered. Her eyes opened slowly, locking onto mine. And for a long, unbearable second, she didn't. She just stared, lips trembling, chest heaving. The air between us felt electric, dangerous, impossible to escape. Then she moved. Just slightly. A shift forward, her breath brushing mine. My heart slammed against my ribs. And before anything could happen, before I could close that last inch, the front door handle rattled. Both of us froze. Someone was home. The doorknob rattled again, followed by a voice I knew all too well. Mom? You here? Her son. My best friend. My stomach dropped. She went pale, lips parting in silent panic. She grabbed my arm, whispering frantically, Go out the back, now! But before I could move, he was already inside. I stumbled a step back, trying to look casual, as if sitting in her living room while she wore that red dress meant nothing at all. He froze when he saw me. Oh, you're here? His eyes flicked from me to his mother, suspicion narrowing the space between us. What's going on? She forced a smile. Too quick, too brittle. He was just helping me pick something to wear. His gaze swept over her dress, then me. The silence stretched long enough to suffocate. Finally, he laughed, but there was no humor in it. You needed him for that? I tried to speak, but my throat locked. He wasn't stupid. He saw more than either of us wanted him to. Her voice trembled just slightly as she said, Don't start. That tiny crack in her tone was all it took. His face hardened. Unbelievable, he muttered, shaking his head as he stormed past us toward the kitchen. She closed her eyes, hand pressed to her temple. This is bad, she whispered. Guilt burned through me. I should have left earlier. I should have known better. But part of me, the selfish, reckless part, didn't regret being caught. At least it pulled everything into the open. Maybe it's better he knows, I said quietly. Her head snapped toward me. No. Don't you dare. Why not? I shot back, my voice raw. We've been dancing around this, pretending it's nothing when it's not. He already suspects. What's the point of hiding? Because he's my son, she said fiercely, eyes shining with anger and pain. And you're supposed to be his friend. The words cut deep, sharper than she meant them to. But then, softer, almost breaking. I can't lose him too. That was the revelation, the real twist. It wasn't just fear of gossip or the age gap. It was the hollow space her divorce had left, the quiet desperation of a woman already terrified of losing the only family tether she had left. I swallowed hard, the weight of her truth pressing down. And what about me? I asked, voice trembling. Her breath caught, but she didn't answer. From the kitchen, her son slammed a cupboard. The sound jolted us back into the moment. She turned away from me, shoulders rigid, eyes fixed on the floor. You should go, she whispered. I wanted to argue, to tell her I wouldn't. But the look in her eyes wasn't a request. It was a plea. So I left. And for the first time, the silence between us didn't feel like tension. It felt like heartbreak. I didn't sleep that night. Her face haunted me, the way her voice cracked when she said she couldn't lose him too. I kept replaying it, over and over, until I couldn't tell if I was more angry or heartbroken. By morning, I couldn't stand it anymore. I found myself walking to her house, rehearsing words that felt too heavy in my mouth. When she opened the door, her eyes widened. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept either. You shouldn't be here, she whispered, but she didn't close the door. I had to, I said. My voice came out harsher than I meant, but I didn't take it back. You can't just push me away and expect me to pretend none of this matters. Her shoulders sagged. She leaned against the doorframe, staring at the ground. You don't understand. He barely speaks to me as it is. If he finds out, if he knows, I'll lose him completely. I stepped closer. And what about me? What happens to me in this equation? Do I just disappear because I don't fit the picture? Her eyes finally lifted, glassy and red. You were never supposed to be part of the picture. The words hit like a slap. For a second, I almost turned and left. But then I saw the way her hands trembled, how her chest rose and fell like she was holding back a storm. Stop lying, I said softly. Not to me. Not to yourself. You feel it. I see it every time you look at me. Her breath caught, and in that silence, something shifted. She dropped her arms, no longer trying to hold herself together. You make me feel alive again, she whispered. And that terrifies me. The admission broke me open. I reached for her hand, hesitating an inch away until she let me close the gap. Her fingers curled around mine, warm and shaking. This isn't about your son, or what people will say, I said. It's about us deciding if it's worth it. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She shook her head, but she didn't let go of my hand. I don't know if I'm strong enough for that. Then let me be strong for both of us, I whispered. For a long, aching moment, we just stood there, hands entwined, the weight of our choice pressing down. Neither of us knew what tomorrow would look like, but right then, in that fragile silence, we weren't pretending anymore. She pulled me closer, forehead resting against mine, her breath warm, uneven. And though she didn't say the words, I felt them anyway. We had crossed the line. There was no going back. We didn't kiss that night. We didn't need to. The way she held my hand, the way her forehead pressed to mine, it was more intimate than anything else could have been. But reality didn't stay away for long. Her son was distant with me in the days that followed, his words shorter, his trust thinner. I knew he suspected. Maybe he always would. And she carried that weight on her shoulders, every glance at him reminding her what she stood to lose. Still, she didn't push me away again. Instead, she started letting me in, piece by piece. A quiet coffee at her kitchen table. A phone call late at night when she couldn't sleep. A walk in the neighborhood when she wanted to escape her thoughts. None of it was dramatic. None of it was reckless. It was just us. And for the first time, I realized love didn't have to be fireworks. Sometimes it was silence. Sometimes it was a hand brushing yours in a crowded room, or a smile meant only for you. One evening, weeks later, I found her standing on the porch watching the sunset. She didn't hear me come up behind her, so I just stood there for a while, watching the way the fading light touched her hair. Finally, she spoke without turning. "Do you ever regret it?" I knew what she meant. All of it, the risk, the secrecy, the broken boundaries. "No," I said honestly. "Do you?" She turned then, eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "I regret waiting so long to admit it." Her words left me breathless. Not a declaration, not a confession shouted into the world, just quiet truth between two people who had already crossed every line. I stepped closer, slipping my hand into hers. She didn't pull away. We stood there as the sky darkened, either of us speaking, both of us knowing the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be fallout, misunderstandings, maybe even people we'd lose along the way. But for the first time, the fear didn't feel bigger than what we had. I looked at her, at the woman I never should have fallen for, my best friend's mother, and I realized it didn't matter how impossible it seemed. Because impossible or not, I wasn't letting go. She squeezed my hand gently, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then we'll face it. Together." And in that moment, I believed her. Speech Balloon, did you enjoy the story? Speech Balloon, what kind of stories would you like to hear next?